Welcome back. This is, I think we've reached episode 5 of setting up the CARF Eurosport from scratch. Now, there's a couple of things I just want to do before switching the model on. And the first of these is to set up the throttle trim. I like a one-click throttle trim for the ECU on-off. Some people prefer 2-step or 3-step, whatever. I'm going to show you how to do this on the Jeti and some of the options that are available. So if we go into Model, Fine Tuning, Digital Trim, down to our throttle and scroll across, it should be a throttle low trim. Yep, now here we go. Step 2%, and the rate, minus and positive, is how far it will go below the sort of idle stick position and how far it would go above the idle stick position. But these are not like 100% travels. These are 100% trims, and trims are a quarter of the total travel, so half of the travel between stick back and neutral. So where it says rate is plus 100%, the full trim range is from stick back to which would be minus 100% to minus 50%. And the minus rate will take you backwards from the stick back position. So it would go from minus 100% down to minus 150% if your servo limits allowed it to go that far. But the system would try to anyway. And the step is 2%. So it would allow you to go 50 beeps or clicks of trim upwards from the minus 100% and 50 clicks or beeps backwards, downwards from the minus 100%. So obviously then, if we were to change the step to 100%, it would take only one click of trim to go up to the full trim forward and one click of trim from neutral to go down to the fully back trim. If we get rid of the fully back trim, then and had 100% in here, it would just take one click to go from stick fully back to trim forward. Or if we set that to 50%, then it would allow us 2 steps to go from stick back, minus 100% travel, to the full forward rate. Let's take a look at doing this. So the first thing I'm going to do is go in there and set that to 100% to demonstrate this to you. Okay? So if we come out of here, so we can get to the servo monitor. There we are. There's the throttle. So full throttle, idle, or shut down. So it's at the minus 100%. The trim is at the neutral point, but we've set the step to 100%. So if I trim forward, this will go to minus 50%. There we are. And that's as far forward as you can go. And then you can operate your throttle. So I'll go one step back, which will take us to the minus 100. And now, if I press the back trim, it tries to go to minus 150, but remember the default servo limit is minus 125. But if you went to the servo setup menu, into the throttle servo, and set its limit to minus 150 or greater, then obviously you'd see that there. Now, minus 100% is already something like minus 120% equivalent to a JR, or very similar to Futaba. So it's already a long way back, so we don't really want the trim going even further back down there. All we want is trim step going from, say, that would be engine shut off, and that would be the engine run. Fine. And if that's with a 100% trim step, I like just the one button click, that's fine. If you would like 2 button clicks to do it, then just set it to a 50% step. So let's go back into the throttle trim, and we'll get rid of that backwards step so that it can't go down below minus 100%. So we just click on that. I'll go to the 100% trim steps. There we go. So I'll show you the effect of this. Say OK to that. Come out, servo monitor, trim back. Right, there we are. There's our shut-off position. I'll press the down trim button. You'll hear it beep, but as you can see, nothing's happening because we've reduced the negative trim to 0, so it can't move back below there. We've left it as the large step with the plus 100% trim, so it'll go up to minus 50 in one step. Okay? But suppose we think, well, that's far too big a step. The ECU would be happier with a step a lot smaller than that. And obviously the ECU needs a trim change of a certain size to recognize you've changed from engine off to engine on condition. And it's going to vary by the brand of ECU. But let's pick a number. Go back into here, throttle. And we'll say that we don't need such a massive trim step. We'll say pick 50%. So now, because trim works only at half the rate, it's going to change the actual servo position by 25%. You with me still? Still at one step trim. Okay, let's have a look at what that does. So there we go. See, it's only changed by 25. So I can one click down takes me to minus 100, engine off, and one click up takes me to minus 75, engine on. Now, you'll have to determine during the learning process in your ECU, when you're teaching it to recognize your throttle and trim positions, whether that step is big enough for it to recognize the difference between engine off and engine on. It quite probably will be, but it may be that you need a slightly bigger step than that. But now at least you know how to do it. Okay, some people don't like a one-button press, just in case they put their thumb down to, say, trim the rudder or whatever, and they don't want to accidentally shut off the engine if they're in flight. Okie doke, not a problem. Come back here and change the step to just 50%. And that would mean it takes you 2 button presses to get there. If you change it to 20%, it'll take you 5 button presses to get there. But let's go for a 50% step. In other words, it takes 2 button presses to cover the entire range. Even though, yes, the rate is 50%, it means it's going to take you 2 button presses to cover whatever that range is. I'm sure you're following that. Let's have a look then. Okay, trim is down. There we go. So 2 button presses. And there we are. It's all the way forward. And 2 button presses required to get it back to the off condition. Okie doke. So I'll say OK to there. I'll just go back in and set it the way I like it, which is a 100%. In other words, 1 step trim. And obviously it would need you just to check during the teaching of the ECU whether that total trim change is enough for your ECU to recognize it. Okie doke. And one other thing I'd like to do is that I found on all my jets, except one which needed major retrimming on the rudder, that I don't need rudder trim. If the rudder is visually centered, it's straight. You don't have the spiral airflow off the propeller to contend with. You don't have P factor off the prop to contend with, all that sort of thing. And therefore, I just don't need the rudder trim. But I do like to use it on the nose wheel steering. So that as I'm taxiing out, if it's drifting a little bit, not just being, yawed into wind, but if it's genuinely starting to turn off a little bit, I can just trim it straight quite quickly before we get to takeoff. So what I like to do is assign that to the steering. And now if I use the trim buttons, the rudder will not trim, but the steering servo on the nose wheel steering will. Okie doke. So it's up to you. That's how I like to do it. But I'm just showing at least the ability to do it if that's what you like. Okie doke. And the other thing I want to do before we switch on is limit the canard movement virtually to 0 so that I don't overdrive that, because the way the original builder had this set up, in fact, I don't think it's anything to do with him. I think it's just to do with the length of the arms on the thing. I think it's going to overdrive the canard by a long way and hurt the servo. So there's 3 ways we can turn down the servo travel before we switch on. We could limit it in the servo setup. Go in here, and change your max positive and max negatives. But that would affect every signal we're sending to the servo, and we will be using the flight mode trim. So if I reduce the servo travel using this, I'll have to use much higher flight mode trim numbers, which ain't going to be a problem really, because we're going for fairly small movements on the takeoff and landing trim. So you could do it that way, or you could do it in dual rate expo. Where's our Canard? There we are. You could change it to a non-symmetrical and then change each endpoint, bring it right down to 0 or nothing. I have a tendency to like function curves. And where are we? Canard, there we are. You would have to change it to a 3-point. Come down, change that point to close to nil, bung it about there, and that point down close to nil for the moment. And then once I've actually got the model up and running, I'll expand them back up to the correct point. I can't see any advantage or disadvantage to any of those 3 different methods. It's entirely up to you where you would tend to naturally go. Use that one, because if you need to make adjustments in the future, that's the menu you will naturally go back to. Not a problem. So just because I've done it in function curves doesn't mean that's the correct way or that's the way you should do it. If you like to do it in servo setup, or if you like to do it with asymmetrical dual rates, that's fine. As long as you use a method that works and doesn't have a cross-contamination of something else you're trying to do, then it's perfectly valid. So just use the menu that you would naturally go to, because as I say, that's the one you'll go back to it 6 months from now when you want to tweak it. Okay, so we'll say okay to that. We're almost ready to switch the model on. Now, when I bought this model second-hand, there were no instructions. So I went to CARF's website, and thankfully they have the instruction manual for the Eurosport. Now, it could be that this manual is well out of date for the current Eurosport, because I think they're onto the, I don't know, the Mark 4, Mark 5, Mark 6 version, something like that. And the travel values in the manual that I've got are very, very different to the actual values I am using. The manual I've got says for elevator 45 up and 35 down. Well, I'm using just 28 in both directions. This is millimeters of the trailing edge at the root of the Elevons. And the instructions say for ailerons 30 millimeters up and down. I'm using just 16 up and down. So, very different to the manual. And I originally programmed it as per the manual, and I took it out for its first ever outing. And fortunately, before I flew it, a friend of mine who is very experienced Eurosport pilot saw me moving the controls and said, "Whoa, that's far too much. You want, half that or something like it." And I said, "Oh, okay. Well, that's what the manual said." He said, "I know, but you'll find it far too twitchy and sensitive." Well, he was a very experienced Eurosport pilot, and he knows what he's talking about. Also extremely capable pilot, so if he found it twitchy, it was twitchy. So I just, on the hoof, turned the travel values down. He said, "Yeah, that looks about right." And it's fine. We've tweaked it from there. So what you want to do is entirely up to you and the build manual you've got. I am going to reset this program of our Eurosport to the actual travel values that I am using, which is, I say, 28 up and down for the elevators, 16 up and down for ailerons. How are we going to do that? Well, of course, you would have switched your model on, and you would have zeroed out all your Elevons to make sure that they are absolutely level, and you would have used the clevises and the linkages to do this. As a rough reference point to get started, I chose the little bit of stub wing fairing, I suppose you could call it, on the ends of the wings. I'll show you what I mean. If we look here, You can see there's just a little sort of lip there. So for my very first flight, I thought, well, that must be where it is. So I got everything lined up there, and I think to within a couple of degrees, that's been about right. And so I lined up one of them and said, how can I be sure that the one on the other side is the same? Because if I line up that Elevon to the little lip on that side, there could be slight differences in the lip. There's no guarantee that they're the same. Well, I have this little handy gadget here. As you can see, there's a little sensor and there. Coming back to this wonderful thing here, the Zikoi balance and weight meter, which also does angles. And we're in angles. And so I chose as a reference ground absolute, and therefore was able to tweak the slight, half-degree differences out of them to get them both exactly the same. They didn't need to be at an exact angle, because obviously once you've taken off, you're going to trim your elevators to the exact level that they need. But it meant at least that once I got off the ground, the Elevons on both sides are going exactly the same. And this is the device I'm going to be using to set up the model. Now, we've got two Elevons on each side, but all I need to do to set up the travels is set up one Elevon on each side correctly, and then I can just visually tweak the numbers on the other one until I see it physically matching that one. Yeah, so we don't need to measure precisely all four Elevons, just one on each side, and then the job will be done visually by matching the others. Okay, I think we're ready for a go. So we'll switch on the model. And it'll get a bit noisy because of the digital servos buzzing against the weight. There we go. I'm going to recycle it just for a second, because I moved the stick to get rid of the
signal lost
activity
signal
alert
lost
before the
signal lost
cycled up.
Signal lost.
Don't move it. There we are. The gyro cycled up quite happily. And okay, well, let's do the Canard first, so that we know that one's done and out of the way, because we're in that at the moment. And here it is. The trailing edge of the Canard lines up with the panel line there. I know some people say to do it slightly differently, but I've always lined it up there. It's flown quite happily for me. I'm happy with that. And on my tape, I have marked the trailing edge position for down. It's a bit difficult to do it because of the curve, but there's a position way down here for the up, and that will be the trim position for the landing takeoff trim. Right, so come back here. I'll go into my menu, come down to the relevant point. Let's go for up elevator first. Which way does the gun sight travel? That way, so that's the point for up elevator. So I shall now simply dial the number until the Canard's met the mark, and push it that way. That'll be the one that needs to change, so I need to come to that point, push it that way, and I'll dial up the number until the trailing edge of the Canard meets the mark on the tape. And there we are. So now Canard's working nicely, travelling well, and I didn't risk overdriving the mechanism or the servo there. So we'll say OK to that. And while we're thinking of the Canard, let's set up its trim. And remember, we created the 3 flight modes, the default, which will be our normal cruising round, and the landing and takeoff. So we can go into flight mode trim, and we come down to Canard. We've set it to separate, so we just go in and trim it. Let's see what we're in default flight mode, so that's normal fly around. We don't want any trim. If we go to takeoff mode, we can change the trim number, positive or negative. let's have a look. Okay, there's the mark I'm aiming for. So I'll just turn the programming dial till we get there. Job done. So that's it set in takeoff, -27, takeoff mode. Let's go to landing mode. And because it's exactly the same value for each, we'll go to -27 again. Now we'll just check it. I'll go to takeoff mode, -27, default mode 0. And there we go. So, normal fly around mode, takeoff, landing, takeoff, normal fly around. And we got that very slight 0.3 second delay of it, so it slows it just a little bit. And that takes care of the Canard. That's our Canard all programmed up. Beautiful. Let's see, what else will we be wanting? Okay, the rudder is going the correct way and the travel is fine. That's good. Right, now we've got to sort out these Elevons. So we go into the Delta Elevon mix, and you can see it lists all 4 servos. And if you've watched any of my other videos, you'll have heard me hammering on and on and on. This should be the left-hand most servo. So in the servo assignment page, it doesn't actually matter which way around you assign them to the sockets. It can be completely random, can be in reverse number, whatever. But there will be a servo that says aileron 1. That's that one. There'll be a servo that says aileron 2. It's that one. And wherever it says aileron 1 is, that should be the most left servo. Then the next servo to the right of that, the next servo to the right of that, and the next servo to the right of that. So that'll be the most far right-hand servo. So if you're standing behind the aircraft, looking down at them, that's the most left, the inner right, the most right servo. And then, as you can see, it's going to give us a travel on each of those servos for the elevator and a travel for the ailerons. Lovely. Snag here, it's not a separate up and down travel, so we can't fine-tune the exact up and downs to match. So what we'll do is we'll use up elevator to set those the same, and then we can use servo setup or the servo balancer within the servo setup to tweak the down travel to be the same and to get matching halfway travels as well. And then for ailerons, again, we'll just set them up for the up travel. If the down travels differ a little, to be honest, it's not going to matter too much. After all, in aileron, you're looking for an imbalance between the sides. Anyway, that's the whole point of aileron. But as long as it's not massive difference between the Elevons, we should be okay. And that is where our little Zekoi device comes in handy now. So I'm going to go, first of all, to the left inner, because that's the one I've got the sensor on. And there's our number, so we can tweak it up or down. Let's come over here to the model. Bring the transmitter with me. Where's my pencil? There we are. So I'm going to do the Elevons first. So I need to choose the elevators. Sorry, not the elevator. Elevons. We'll do they are all Elevons. We're going to do the elevators first. Reference, ground relative, set 0. Good. We're trying to do angle. There we are. Okay, that's the left one, which is the one I've chosen here, Servo 2, because I've only got the sensor on Servo 2. So Servo 1, we can match it up visually. And this has already been set up in the data setting page of the little meter for the travels that I have. Remember, I'm using quite different travels to the one in the CARF manual. I'm not telling you that you should use my travels or that mine are correct. It's just they work for me. So don't go using my travels and thinking that they're any better than CARF's. Okay, so if I pull full up elevator, that's not enough. We can see that the going up, it hasn't quite reached this line. This will turn from yellow to green if we get enough. Is it doing it? Not quite. So I'm going to increase the travel until we get there. There we go, it's turned green. You can hear the servos complaining, but don't worry, they are all mechanically quite okay. And push down. It's gone a little bit over, it's gone red. So there we go. I needed to get that value. 59% gives me the correct up travel, but a little bit too much down travel. Okay, let's see. We'll fix that in servo setup. Okie doke. Right, let's go from there to servo 3, which is the innermost one on the right, which is that one there. It's that one here. And once again, activate the field, pull the stick, and that's actually correct. And you can see, I'll give it one more click of up, the actual degrees, which is those flashing numbers, 12.5 to 13, is the same on both sides. And that's very important in the case of a delta, that when you use the elevator, both sides travel very accurately the same. Because if they're not very well matched, then in effect you've got a little bit of aileron when you pull back the elevator and the model will start to roll. So if your ailerons aren't perfectly matched in travel, who's going to notice much? You'd be very, very clever if you could notice much difference in the handling. But if the elevator function doesn't match precisely, you are going to notice the roll. Okay, and I've just realised what a muppet. Symmetry is switched on, so when I adjusted servo 3, it adjusted servo 2. How dare it? Switch symmetry off. Yep, I'll watch my meter again. Yep, the left one's going just a smidge further. So I'll come back to servo 2, turn it down. It was about 59%, wasn't it? There we are, both going very accurately the same. Right, now I need to get servo 1 to match the up travel on servo 2, and I'm going to do this purely visually. So I'll pull up elevator again. Oh, it's much too much. So I'll turn that down. There we are. Servo 1 at a full up is matching servo 2 visually. So now across to servo 4, and I'll do the same thing. I'll just match them visually. There we go. Lovely. So that is the up elevator travel set. So we've still to set it, match it down. We'll use servo setup, and we've still to match partial travels as well. Okay, how about ailerons? Come down here, make sure symmetry is still switched off. Yep. And I will change my little meter from elevator to the aileron settings. Good, good. Now if I move the ailerons, let's see what happens. They've gone red, which means they've gone past the point that I've programmed for it. So we need to turn those travels down. And once again, we'll do it on servos 2 and 3, and then I can visually match servos 1 and 4. So here we go. So I push, where are we? We're on the left aileron. So left, and that's too far. So if I turn the travel value down, there, the line's turned green. Lovely. If I push it down, it's gone a little bit too far, but to say we'll tweak that out later. Right, let's look at the right hand servo. Again, we'll do it for the up direction. So I move now to servo 3, activate that, watch my little meter for the right one. I'll push the stick to the right so that it comes upwards. There we go, and I can turn my travel down until we get the meter going green. Oh, be careful not to introduce any elevator like I did then, because the problem is I'm trying to hold the stick and twirl the button and the camera all with one hand. There we go, green, that's correct. I'll just check on that one, I didn't, yeah. There. When you're setting these, I say be very careful that when you're setting the elevator you're not holding in any aileron, and when you're setting the aileron you're not holding in any elevator. Okay, now I just need to set servo 1 and servo 4 visually. So I'll do that. Left aileron will bring it up. And I tweak that down. And that's servo 1 set. And now I come across here. That now I'll go right aileron to bring them up. And I'll visually watch it. Turn the wheel. And there we are. Super duper. So the up travels are all matching, it's just the down travels are a little bit mismatched, and we can tweak that out in servo setup. So now we can say OK to that and have a think about what we shall do next. Golly, we've hit 30 minutes, that's a whopper of a video, so I'll stop this here and we'll have a think about what to do in episode 6.